Welcome to Stuff You Should Know, a production of iHeartRadio.
Hey, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Josh Clark. There's Charles W. Chuck Bryant, and Jerry's here too, which makes this Stuff You Should Know, the podcast.
Oh, you know what? Say small talk while I look up who gave me this idea.
Why do you keep doing this to me? I have to, entertain everybody. You once did this to me on stage. Get this, everybody. We were on stage at the Bell House in Brooklyn, and Chuck said he had to go to the bathroom all of a sudden, and I was left on stage having to entertain everybody while he just hung out backstage. I don't think you even went to go to the bathroom. And long story short, I ended up showing off my moonwalk.
Yeah, but I totally went to the bathroom. You think that was all a bit?
Yeah.
No.
Maybe you went and took some drugs to keep going back out on stage. But I'm sure in the green room, you didn't even need to go do those in the bathroom.
No, I genuinely had to pee such that I didn't think I could make it through the show.
I've felt that way before too. San Antonio, I had to run off the stage once because of that.
That's right. All right, here I got you. I got it. This idea initially, this is on my list, but I forgot about it. Mm-hmm. But then was reminded by Alex Ramos in State College, Pennsylvania.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Alex Ramos. This is a great idea.
Toynbee Tiles. Had you ever heard of this?
Sure.
Okay.
Had you not?
Well, no, I just said it had long been on my list.
Oh, okay. That's right. Where did you hear of it?
It just one of those things that pops up on the internet, and you're like, oh, let me read about this. This looks interesting.
For sure, and it is definitely interesting. But and it would have been, I think, even more interesting 10 years ago, before the mystery was virtually solved.
True.
But it's still interesting if you ask me.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those where you should very clearly tell everyone what we're talking about right now.
Okay, so what we're talking about is a phenomenon called the Toynbee Tiles, where in the asphalt, on the street, on street corners and crosswalks and intersections, all over the Northeast, seemingly concentrated in Philadelphia, but also going as far west as, I think, Kansas City. And then also, strangely, down in Chile, Argentina, and Brazil, these tiles bearing some really bizarre messages cut out of linoleum and, again, embedded into the asphalt of the street, started appearing and have appeared mysteriously. No one has any idea or any demonstrable proof of who is actually doing this. But they have been doing it since at least the mid-'80s and conceivably still going on today.
Right. And they are known as the Toynbee Tiles. They're about the size of a license plate. Mm-hmm. And the general main message that you see on most of these is as follows. And it's in a very distinct script. It is generally all caps.
Yeah, of cutout letters made of linoleum.
Cutout linoleum. And it says this: Toynbee, that is Toynbee, Toynbee idea. Underneath that, it says, in Kubrick's 2001.
Yeah.
Underneath that, it says, resurrect dead. And underneath that, it says, on planet Jupiter. And then a lot of tiles will have these little tags underneath in much smaller script that say all kinds of things. And we'll just read a few examples here. Media will be reduced to ash. You must make plus place tiles. You.
I like that one because you has 3 exclamation points after.
I'm only one man, which turned out to be a clue. And when I caught a fatal disease, they gloated over its death.
This is my favorite. Can I read?
Sure.
Now Galileo's cult of the Hellion is now searching for more than one hell ideologies to get more reward.
Right. And then one final one, I think, because it's instructive to the story. Murder all journalists, I beg you.
Yeah.
So these are the little smaller messages underneath the main 4, I guess you would call tenets of this individual. And one thing we should point out, and Ed helped us put this together, is apparently, and this is something I didn't even realize until yesterday, When this person refers to hellions, apparently he's talking about Jewish people. I don't know if that's proven.
I think specifically he's talking about like a Jewish conspiracy, a Jewish cabal, usually a Jewish media conspiracy is seemingly what he's referring to by hellions.
Okay, so there is, in some of these tiles, an anti-Semitic bent to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it also points out that this person perhaps may have some sort of mental illness, but it's also not right to even say that because we don't even know who this person is.
Right.
Demonstrably, as for proof, like you said. So it's also not great to like project that when you really don't know anything.
No, and depending on where you look on the internet, what sites you visit, I think there's one called Toynbee Idea, either .net or .com or something like that. It's an authoritative site. It's by one of the main investigators of these Toynbee tiles who ended up working on this documentary that basically solved the case. He refers to the Toynbee tiles as like an art project, basically. So it could be the ravings of a madman or the ongoing project of an artist, or it could be somebody who legitimately wants to make a crazy idea happen. There's a lot of different interpretations.
Yeah.
And like you said, because we can't say for sure who it is that is doing this, you can't really get to the genuine, like, you can't prove, oh, well, this person has a mental illness, this is how they're communicating that mental illness. Like you just can't say that. But it is worth putting in the back of your mind as you kind of hear the rest of it, you know?
Yeah, and that documentary, by the way, is called Resurrect Dead. It is available on YouTube. But the reason I mentioned YouTube is I didn't find that you could pay for it anywhere and watch it. But that's where I
did.
Oh, you can pay for it?
I did pay for it like a chump. I couldn't find it on YouTube.
What? See, I was trying to do the right thing. Where did you find it?
Voodoo?
See, I looked all over. I used my handy app that tells you where you can stream stuff, and it was unlisted.
Uh-huh.
And then I looked on a few streamers, and it was unlisted. So
right.
I went to YouTube, and it's just sitting right there, so I watched it.
Oh, man. I looked at YouTube, and all I could find were those stupid previews.
Did you type in Toynbee Tiles documentary?
Yes, I typed in the name of it, Resurrect Dead.
It's weird. It's the first hit.
I don't know what happened.
Well, regardless, it's about an hour and a half long, and it's worth watching. I think it's a good doc. It's not great, but I think for when it was made, I think they did a pretty good job with it.
Yeah, I think it's got like a 6+, maybe even a 7 on IMDb, and I would agree with that. It was worth the $4 I paid to rent it. I'm fine with that.
So we should talk a little bit about the message, I think, and break down what that means, because there are a lot of components to this mystery, from what the message means, where it came from, to who is doing this, how they're doing it. And it's a pretty interesting little multi-pronged mystery, I think.
Yeah, and thanks to those 3 investigators who worked on the documentary, who are
big time,
kind of portrayed on the documentary, we basically understand everything there is to understand about what the Toynbee tile makers' ideas are and what they mean. But that's fairly new. I mean, for years, basically from the advent of the internet, the Toynbee tiles were taken up as like something to commemorate and discuss and talk about from the very beginning. And so there's a lot of time for this mystery to brew, and it was fairly recent that it's kind of been settled. But what they figured out is, from the outset, the Toynbee that was discussed or mentioned in the tiles is Arnold J. Toynbee, who's kind of a popular historian. He wrote about civilizations and the history of civilizations and the history of politics and how it all kind of banded together, and how the civilizations that rose and fell over time were all part of the same kind of current, that they were all related to one another, and that they rose and fell in predictable ways. Usually they would rise when a group of very smart, creative people would kind of lead the charge in creatively addressing a problem, and civilizations would fall when people stopped responding creatively to problems and were overwhelmed by those problems. And he was really, really popular for a while, but then he started to really kind of take an increasingly Christian view worldview of history and politics, and placed a greater emphasis on the role of religions and Christianity, I believe in particular, than historians in general were comfortable with, and his views kind of fell out of favor. Suffice to say, he was a genuine original thinker who is definitely worth reading about, if not reading directly.
And it's a good thing his name was Toynbee.
Yeah,
it really made it a lot easier to narrow down the first mystery, basically.
Definitely, yeah.
Which is, who is Toynbee?
Yeah.
If it was the Smith tiles, it'd been a lot harder. But that is certainly the Toynbee, and it seems like the idea that, and we'll refer to the person as the tile maker, as Ed does. Toynbee's book Experiences seems to be the centerpiece of the crux of the idea that the tile maker is, let's just say, fixated on. The concept of the soul and the possibility that you could resurrect after death down to the molecular level. And that's sort of what resurrect dead means in this case. And then as far as on planet Jupiter, that comes, it seems like, at least, and again, we're piecing this, people have pieced this together because they've never interviewed the tile maker. But it looks like that's from Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, because it mentions Kubrick. And in that novel, they are, as you know, the star child is reborn on Jupiter.
Yeah, and that's where the astronauts are being dispatched to, is Jupiter, to figure out what's going on with some weird signal coming from that planet, right?
That's right. So if you put all those things together, then these four ideas as the Toynbee idea make sense. It
does kind of make sense. And like Toynbee died, you cannot say, like the tile maker does, that Toynbee had the idea of resurrecting the dead on Jupiter, and that 2001 was about that Toynbee idea. That's the tile maker's interpretation of all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But Toynbee was talking about scientifically resurrecting people, or whether it was possible. And the tile maker took that idea and ran with it, and basically came to believe that that science was meant to carry out the project of creating the afterlife that God promised. And that to resurrect everybody who had ever lived, you would need a planet the size of Jupiter, which is a huge, it's a gas giant, that you would need a planet the size of Jupiter to fit all those people. So it makes sense in all sorts of different ways once you understand all of it. But even still, if you step back and think about what they're saying, the tile maker's saying, it's a genuinely bizarre idea, especially if you stop and realize that they legitimately were trying to make this idea happen.
Well, and again, that's an assumption in and of itself. Like, one day the tile maker could come out and say, hey, this was all a joke. I'm basically Banksy meets the Max Headroom incident.
Yeah.
And I've been, meets Andy Kaufman, and I've been punking you guys all these years.
Sure.
Of course I know that that's not possible. But, I don't know. It seems like this is something that this person believes, and that they're trying to get this message out. Because another way that this message was gotten out is in a neighborhood in Philadelphia in, I guess, the 1980s was when people would be watching television, and all of a sudden their signal would be interrupted by this Toynbee message coming through the TV.
Yeah.
And they figured out that it was, and I hope I'm not getting too far ahead, but we'll keep the mystery intact. But it was coming from someone driving around their car with a high-powered antenna that could cause this kind of interference.
Right. And this was pre-tile, so this would have been the very early 80s, because they think the first tiles that were laid down in the mid-80s. And then even before the first tile, so basically around the time, no, I think even before the driving around interrupting people's TV watching.
Yeah, the posters.
There were posters around Philadelphia that were placed up that had very odd messages on them. But they were all generally like the same stuff the tiles were talking about, which again was the idea of resurrecting the dead on Jupiter. That was a Toynbee idea that was depicted in 2001. That's generally the bulk of the message. But also there's a weird little kind of side tangent that happened. David Mamet plays a role in this.
Yeah.
because in 1983, Mamet wrote a play called 4 a.m., and he said later that it was an homage to Larry King, who back in the early 80s was a late-night radio talk show host, but long before he had his TV show.
Long before he bought suspenders?
Yeah. And Mamet used to listen to that, and he wrote a one-act play based on it. And in the one-act play, the caller who calls into this radio show talks about resurrecting the dead on Jupiter and how people are dead molecules that you could bring back to life. And Mamet basically said, I guess this guy got the idea from me, but if you step back and look at the timeline of everything, that call apparently went in 1980, and Mamet didn't write the play for 3 years later. So David Mamet probably wrote a play based on a call he heard of the tile maker who called into Larry King in 1980 to explain his views on resurrecting the dead on Jupiter.
Right. And everywhere I've looked, I haven't really seen that anyone is accusing Mamet of being dishonest. I think the general consensus is, if that were the case, that he probably didn't realize that he had heard it and probably remembers it as an original idea, and not that he just stole this thing and lied about it.
No, but it is impossible that it's a coincidence because of the language that's used in the one act, like resurrect dead molecules,
just
resurrect them on Jupiter. 2001 is mentioned. Toynbee is mentioned. It's just not possible that it's a coincidence. Somebody influenced somebody else. But yeah, it does seem to be honest from what I can tell too.
All right. Good time for a break, I think. I think the mystery is mounting.
I think so.
I think people have their popcorn out and they're ready for part 2.
Okay. Well, let's give it to them.
We'll be right back. All right. So you mentioned at the beginning, Philadelphia is the centerpiece, and it is, I feel like we can almost certainly say that the tile maker lives or lived in Philadelphia, perhaps still does.
Yeah.
And because there were, not only did Philadelphia have the most concentration of tiles, and then it sort of spread from there, Boston, D.C., Maryland, New York, again, some sort of on a direct westward band, out to Kansas City, like through Cincinnati, but never anything south. There are, in this one neighborhood where they end up thinking they pinpointed the tile maker, they found all these little test tiles all over the place. These just little bits of tile, little letters here and there, but the same script and the same technique. So it's pretty obvious that this is where it originated. Yes.
I mean, that to me is like, well, there's your answer right there.
Yeah.
So they also, like, the people who were reporting having their TV interrupted by somebody driving down the street with their shortwave radio, that happened in Philadelphia, in the same neighborhood where those test tiles were later found by the documentary investigators.
And that wasn't a mystery, right? They were like, we know who that is. Stop doing it.
Yes, and that became clear once those investigators visited that neighborhood and started talking to neighbors.
Right.
And one of the reasons they were able to link it was because the radio broadcast that was coming through their TVs from the guy driving down the street was talking about resurrecting the dead on Jupiter, an idea of Arnold Toynbee's that was depicted in 2001. So basically, this tile maker got this idea starting about 1979, they pinned it down, and was trying to figure out creative ways to spread this publicity. And one of the first ways that they tried to do it was to turn to the press. And they called the Philadelphia Inquirer and tried to relate their ideas to one of the journalists there, a guy named Clark De Leon. And in very much the same way that they called Larry King 3 years before, Clark De Leon took the call and then wrote up a very unflattering piece about the idea, and I think kind of set off that disdain for the media that the tile maker displays in some of the additional tiles.
Yes, absolutely. So at some point, there was a group formed by the TM called the Minority Association. Upon further investigation in this documentary, it seems that it was not a group or an association at all. It was just this one person.
Right.
And there are some little clues that we'll get to later on about that. But that was this group that was formed, and there were these radio broadcasts where the tile maker would say, I will send information if you want it to anyone who wants it. And someone did, because they had this stuff 20 years later, all these materials sent from the quote unquote minority association that the documentary filmmakers eventually got their hands on, which was a big, big find for them.
Yeah, and it was really interesting, to watch it in the documentary, how they managed to come across that. It was actually, I was like, this is some really weird filler that they're using, and it finally led to finding these documents and turning up, people who knew this guy back in the day. But when they got these documents, that's when a lot of the questions were filled in, because it was that minority association's press materials, and it explained everything. Anything you had a question about before was basically answered in this. And most of the documents were signed by somebody named James Morosco, which, like you were saying, they believe now that the minority association was just one person, the tile maker, and that the tile maker was using aliases to make it seem like there were more people than just one, and James Morosco was one of those aliases. It just so happens there was a James Morosco in Philadelphia who seems to have had nothing to do with this. It was just, again, an alias.
Right. So that was a bit of a red herring, but elsewhere in the document, there was only one other name mentioned. And these people, it's these three dudes basically that became, I don't know about obsessed, but it became like a fixation for them to solve this mystery. And this was at the very beginnings of the internet is when they started off. That there was no information when they first started looking on the internet about the Toynbee tiles. Yeah,
we should say their names, because they really did some good detective work. Justin Durr, Steve Wynick, and Colin Smith are the three investigators. And then John Foy made the documentary, and they all seem to have worked together for that.
Yeah, and these guys did not know each other previously. They met online through their individual interest in the Toynbee tiles and got together and seemingly became friends, as they investigated this.
Yeah.
Which I think they could have fleshed it out a little more in the documentary, but that's fine. A little human element to it.
Sure. Well, yeah, they seem to really focus on Justin.
Yeah, they did. He seems to be the guy that sort of ran with it the most. But the only other name in this minority association set of documents was Severino Verna, a.k.a. Sevi, S-E-V-Y, Verna. And they tracked Sevi Verna down to this neighborhood in Philadelphia. And they said, well, Sevi Verna is the guy that rode around in the car broadcasting these ideas. And they were like, well, that's got to be him then. And they were like, he's a recluse. He never, you don't see him much. He does his shopping in the middle of the night. There was this incident where, because all this stuff happened, some people broke in, held a knife to his throat, and were like, because he was interrupting everyone's TV and all that stuff. And especially after that, it seemed like he became even more of a recluse. Mm-hmm. And they said, but he had this old car with this huge antenna and didn't have a passenger seat and had a big hole in the floorboard, and it was just a mess. And they're knocking on this guy's door in the documentary, and he's just not coming to the door. And in the meantime, they're exploring these other side roads, either figuring out the deal with Morosco, or there was another candidate named, was it Railroad Jim? Mm-hmm. Which had a little bit of, I could see why they went down that road, but it became pretty clear that it wasn't Railroad Jim.
Yeah, and then same with James Morosco. He lived in Philadelphia at the time, but he died in I think 2003. And some of the tile makers, a lot of the tile makers' tiles continued on after that time. That can be pointed as no, these are definitely the original tile makers' tiles. Because one of the things that clouds this mystery is there have been plenty of copycats.
Of course.
Some of them are just kind of following up, picking up what the tile maker's laying down kind of thing. Other people seem to be actually trying to actively confuse people by making tiles that look as much and seem as much like the tile maker's tiles. But these three investigators, among others, have gotten so good at examining the tiles, they can tell what's the tile maker's and what's not, and have even pointed to like change, like different periods. You know how artists like Picasso had a blue period and all that? Like the tile maker has had periods over the years, and some of them are so different that it wasn't until years later that these investigators have gone back and been like, actually, that was the tile makers. We thought he stopped for a while and this was a copycat. It was actually him all along. So it definitely was not James Morosco. His widow says, I have no idea what you guys are talking about with Jupiter or 2001. My husband had nothing to do with any tiles. Please stop calling. And then same thing with Railroad Jim. He died and the tiles continued on, so it couldn't have been him either. So it definitely seems to be Severino Verna. And that's been, there's just so many things that point to him. It's pretty much conclusive.
Yeah, and there was, we also should mention beyond the regular kind of license plate size tiles, there was one sort of massive information dump set of tiles that just had a bunch of you can go online and read this one. It's really long. They talk about a lot of things there seems to be an obsession with the Soviet Union, which, during the Cold War, it sort of makes sense that this might be a thing. The media, again, the tile maker talks about the mafia breaking into his house to kill him, which is probably a reference to the people in the neighborhood who broke in to threaten him. And it's just sort of a long, rambling info dump that is, I think, when you talk to these three investigators or anyone that's in the Toynbee Tiles, they're like, this is the real sort of Magna Carta, I guess, of the tile maker. And this has the most clues in it. And I think we also forgot to mention that the reason they even found Verna was, I think it was one in Brazil, had an actual street address in Philadelphia that turned out to be Verna's address.
Oh, okay. I thought the address turned out to be a dead end, but there was definitely one of the earliest tiles, maybe the earliest tiles, were those with that address in Philadelphia. So it turned out to be his, huh?
Yeah, but I think that the only place that was on one tile in Brazil.
Okay, I gotcha. But so those were tiles from the mid-'80s, and they think that those tiles were put down before even one started appearing in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and that's sort of like one of the mysteries of the documentary is that they eventually talked to Sevi's Verna's mom because he's not answering the phone or the door, and she was like, Sevi doesn't travel. He's got a lung condition, and he wouldn't have traveled to South America or even outside of Philadelphia really because of this condition.
Yeah, that's a puzzler because if you look at those tiles and the fact that it's a Philadelphia address in the same neighborhood at least as Sevi Verna, it's definitely one of Verna's tiles. So what
he could have had a proxy, I guess.
I guess so, for sure. And they also say why South America? There's apparently something in that book, Experience by Arnold Toynbee. It's a bit of an autobiography as well, and he talks about going to these places that these tiles appeared in the 80s. So I guess it's possible he could have had a proxy do it.
Right, but here's the thing, and we'll leave you with this before our break. It seems very much 100% sure it's Sevi, but no one has ever seen this happen, these tiles that are embedded in asphalt. So the question for a long time remained still, how was this happening how are these hundreds and hundreds of tiles getting embedded in the street without anyone ever seeing this guy do it? And we'll talk about that right after this.
Okay, Chuck, that was quite a cliffhanger.
Right?
So no one's ever seen Sevi Verna do this. No one's ever seen anybody do this. And it was thanks to the three investigators, which, by the way, did you ever read those Alfred Hitchcock books, The Three Investigators? One of them was Hitchcock's nephew, and Hitchcock would make a cameo every once in a while. But they were
I remember what you're talking about, but I didn't read them. Kind
of like a Hardy Boys type thing.
Sure.
They were great. And every time I say three investigators, I keep thinking of that. It's very nostalgic for me.
Right.
There's a little portion of my brain that's really enjoying things right now. Not to say the rest of my brain isn't, but it's enjoying it in a different way.
You never explained it.
I think I did too. But these 3 investigators, I can't even remember what I was talking about.
We were talking about the fact that he had never been found doing this.
Oh, yes. These 3 investigators nailed down how this actually happened. And then further, they pieced together how Sevi Verna in particular would have done it too. And it's pretty ingenious.
Yeah, so the way they figured out how it was happening was a near miss, which was and this is crazy coincidence, but the lead investigator guy, Justin, was in Philly looking around, doing investigating, and a lot of this investigation at the time was literally walking around city streets looking down for these tiles.
Yeah.
It was like, kind of the hard way before the internet was truly like filled up with information about this. And they're some of the first guys that filled the internet with this stuff. Mm-hmm. But he happened upon a fresh tile that had just been laid down that he said was not there when he passed by before. And he was like, it happened within minutes of when I was there. Mm-hmm. And it's in the documentary. It's pretty thrilling that this guy, like, he starts yelling around and saying that he's, I believe in Toynbee ideas. Where are you? Come out, come out.
Right.
And it's like, oh my God, this guy's just like almost solved the case. But what they found was these tiles were, and this is really pretty ingenious actually how it's done. They use like asphalt crack filler, like this black tarry stuff. Mm-hmm. And the key though is the tile is wrapped in roof paper, tar paper, which is black. So it's laid down and it just looks black on top. And then over time, this thing is run over by cars and walked over and gets embedded further and further. And eventually the tar paper just wears away to reveal the tile.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing.
So over the course of weeks, maybe even months, as this is being pushed down and melting into the asphalt, apparently on one of the tiles where he instructs people on making more tiles to do it themselves, he says lay them in the summertime so that the sun will bake them into the asphalt. But he never provided any other really detailed instructions aside from that, and said use asphalt crack filler, and then that's it. So these guys managed to piece this together from that one tile, that fresh tile they found. But even still, the mystery remained on how they were appearing in some really strange places, like the middle of the street, like a busy street, the middle of a highway, the entrance of the Holland Tunnel.
Yeah, that's
places
the big one.
It would be like really dangerous for a person to be squatting down, like trying to install one of these tiles. And they pieced it together by something one of the neighbors told them that you had mentioned earlier, that Sevi Verna had a car that didn't have a passenger side seat and that had no floorboard or a huge hole in the floorboard. And what they figured out once they found this fresh tile is that he might pull up to a stoplight, might stop in the middle of the road, put his hazards on, who knows. But he could lay down one of these pre-made tiles with asphalt filler, crack filler on the bottom and tar paper on top, smooth it down, and then drive off and just wait for it to be revealed, over the coming weeks or months.
This is the part that I love more than any other part of this whole mystery. Yeah. Is the ingenious, elegant, yet simple way that this tile maker would do this.
Yeah.
I love it. And didn't even necessarily have to stop for too long. Like, I get the impression that this thing is tarred on the bottom such that you can just kind of drop it there and it'll stay in place.
I would guess.
Drive over it with that back tire and it's in there.
Yeah. And the idea that it's like slowly, it's protected until it's revealed, like people walking on it, people driving on it, not paying any attention to it whatsoever. And then in doing so, they're actually helping anchor this piece. I just find that just like chef's kiss, And then the other part of it too is it's ephemeral. Like these things are made of linoleum embedded in the asphalt. They're being driven over, they're being walked over even after the tar paper's gone. So they're not meant to last very long. I saw like a lifespan of usually about a year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that's if the road crews don't happen to be repaving that street in the meantime. In some cities, they actually go dig these things up when they're reported.
Boo.
I think Chicago and New York do that. But for the most part, they tend to just kind of linger along until they slowly like kind of get trashed and then are eventually repaved over. So it's an ephemeral project as well that he's just constantly updating and doing and has been since the mid-'80s.
Yeah, and you get a sense of the real delight from the people, from these three guys, and then just other people in general, of finding these, and like it's almost like a scavenger hunt. And then when they find them, like then assessing and appreciating and reveling in its condition, like, oh, this one's pretty new, it's still in pretty good shape, or look, there are only fragments of this one left. It's pretty neat. I mean, I'm going to New York in 2 days for the first time in 2 years, and you can bet your bottom dollar I'm going to be trying to find one of these and get in a picture.
Well, you'll probably find there's a lot of copycats these days. Some, like we said, are trying to confuse the issue. Others are just kind of vibing on the tile maker's vibe. I
won't be suckered by any copycat.
The most prolific is House of Hades. They don't seem to care at all about resurrecting the dead on Jupiter, but they really like the idea of reducing all media and journalists to ash, which is kind of a side thing, like we said, the Toynbee Tile maker is into. So there's a good chance you will see some, but it's not necessarily a tile maker unless you actually go actively seek them out, and you can find that on Toynbee Idea.
Yeah.
.com or .net, whatever it is. They have them like archived, so you could go look for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to cheat. I'm not just going to randomly walk around
for really?
3 days trying to find tiles.
Looking down the whole time?
Yeah, I got other stuff to do, but people to see. But the other thing I want to mention too before we close is just, I found myself watching this documentary and sort of exploring the idea of anonymity and how I feel about that in a case like this, where you have someone who, let's say this person has some sort of mental condition, and this is their outlet, and instead of standing there with a bullhorn on a street corner, this may be their messaging system. Mm-hmm. And like when I saw these guys banging on the door and making phone calls to his mom, I was like, leave him alone.
Yeah, it kind of hurt to watch, huh?
Yeah, and they even talk about that, and they're trying to be respectful, but they do talk about the fact that, they think they saw someone upstairs, clearly at home, not answering the door, when it sort of hit them that, like, this person may be up there really scared.
Right.
When the documentary came out, there was a lull in activity from the tile maker. So, but then I thought, but then why are you going out and putting these things all over the place and seemingly trying to start a movement or attract attention? Although I don't know about start a movement, because it's not like that ever genuinely was the goal, I don't think.
Yeah, it was.
I don't know. It didn't feel like it to me, because it seems like if that would have been the case, it would have been, here's who I am and here's where we'll meet. And I don't know. I'm not convinced that this person wanted other people involved.
But that's so imagine if you felt like you were the only person who understood what God wanted science to do, and you were a recluse who was not at all comfortable interacting with other people. What would you do? Well, you would, when someone came knocking on your door saying, hey, listen, I think you're a great, brilliant thinker, and I believe in this movement, I can help you get your word out, then you take them up on it. Like, it seems like this person did not want to be discovered. Right. And thus did not want to start a movement to be at the center of. Yes, I don't think that he wanted to be at the center of it. I think he wanted this movement to start. Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. So one of the things that was in that press kit that the guy wrote off for in the early 80s and still kept for like 20 or so years, it says, as the most unusual scientific movement in the USA, the group wants the world to put all other affairs aside in order to scientifically colonize the planet Jupiter. So, like, if he believed that, and that's what his genuine aim was. But he felt totally ill-equipped to actually publicize it himself, like making tiles and embedding them in a clever way in asphalt actually kind of makes sense to me.
See, I think that's the final mystery, is the purpose of this to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, if you take it on face value, then he was trying to make resurrection happen, knowing he couldn't do it himself. He needed science to do it, but he had to rouse everybody to do it on his behalf, basically. Yeah, who knows? Maybe it is just an ongoing art project. Who knows?
I don't know. I think that's a mystery we'll never solve. In the documentary, there it sort of closes on an interesting thing where I think the main guy tells the story of, I think was it on a bus or something?
Yeah.
He thinks they're on a bus together, and it's sort of a mutual acknowledgement and eye contact of, I know who you are. You're the guy that's been knocking on my door that did the documentary, and I know that you're the tile maker, and but no words were exchanged.
No, and he concludes like, I need to leave this guy alone forever. I just have to accept it and move on, that he doesn't want to be a part of this.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. Well, if you want to know more about the Toynbee tiles, there is a lot on the internet that you can read about it. You can watch Resurrect Dead. It was a pretty good documentary. Definitely worth $4. And since I said definitely worth $4, it's time for listener mail.
I'm going to call this Phantom Kidney. Hey guys, you've been my go-to for audio entertainment since 2012 when I was working to finish my forensic science graduate research. I finally have something to email about, though. 4 years ago this May, I donated a kidney to my friend's mom. Technically, my kidney went to someone else directly because we were in the paired exchange program, which I learned about from you guys.
Wow.
And I actually experienced phantom kidney sensation.
Wow.
I know, right? Luckily, the phantom sensation was not painful, but almost a weird, specific awareness and feeling. Because who can actually feel their kidneys, right? But it was on the same side of the one that I lost, and lower back. Who knows? It could have been placebo, because they warned me that it was possible, but it was fascinating to learn of phantom organ pain firsthand and from you guys.
Yeah.
Just figured that was unique enough and sort of a fun learning experience. If you have an opportunity to emphasize the paired exchange program, please add it in again. Just by me jumping in to donate, 3 transplants were able to be performed. While every donation program is different, my experience was absolutely wonderful, and I would gladly do it again if I had another to spare. And if anyone were interested in more information, I would gladly share it with them. I love what you guys do. It's been fun going through life alongside you both. That is Mackenzie from Maine, currently in Pennsylvania, with 1 kidney. And definitely check out the paired kidney exchange program.
Yeah.
If that's something that you are able to do. If you have a good, healthy kidney that you can healthily donate, then someone would be glad to take it off your hands.
Emphasis added. Also, Mackenzie, hats off to you for doing that. That's an amazing thing that you did, and you deserve to be canonized. So congratulations. And if you want to be like Mackenzie and basically say, hey, you want to hear about this cool thing I did? You can send us an email. Wrap it up, spank it on the phantom kidney, and send it off to stuffpodcast@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff You Should Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.